Have you ever thought about visiting Versailles on your next trip to Italy? Of course not. Versailles is in France. But Italy has its own version of a spectacular royal palace that can go toe-to-toe with Versailles and can actually exceed it in some ways.
In today's video, come along with us on a journey through one of Italy's most magnificent treasures, the Reggia di Caserta, or otherwise known as the Royal Palace of Caserta, near Naples. Join us as we uncover the secrets and grandeur of this architectural masterpiece. By the end, you'll be wondering why you've never heard of it, and you'll be itching to visit.
We'll also let you know how to get there and give you some tips to make sure you have the best visit possible.
It's impressive from first sight and throughout your visit. But Versailles?
Let's talk about how much they're really alike. Both are large palaces built in the countryside outside the capital. That gave the monarchs control over his court so there was no intrigue, and some distance from the city in case there were riots. Both were conceived by powerful kings, Louis XIV of France and Charles VII of Naples, who then became Charles III of Spain.
One reason they're similar is because the construction of the Reggia di Caserta was begun in 1751, about 100 years after Versailles was built. So the people who built Caserta were actually able to go to school on Versailles and use it as a model for their construction and design. Finally, Caserta actually has real star power. It's been in several movies, some big blockbusters, including episodes 1 and 2 of the Star Wars series, Angels and Demons, and Mission Impossible 3, as well as a bunch of other movies.
It's easy to get to. It's only about 40 minutes on the train from Naples, and it costs about €4. So that puts it only about an hour and a half from Rome, or about 3.5 hours from Florence. So you can get to it as part of your trip to Italy. The train arrives right in front of the palace, across from the piazza in front of the building.
If you'd like to learn more about using the train system in Italy, we actually made a video about that right here. So check it out. It's got a lot of helpful information.
A nice Caserta visit is 4 to 5 hours, so you can see the palace and the gardens.
And you definitely want to see the gardens.
So it makes it a good day trip from Naples. You'd really like to go on a nice day if you can, so you can experience both the palace and the gardens.
But note, the Reggia di Caserta is closed on Tuesdays, so don't go on Tuesday.
Tickets to visit can be bought either online or on site, and they're €18 for both the palace and for the gardens. Unfortunately, here at the Reggia di Caserta, there are no senior discounts or discounts for families, but it's still a good value.
So before we go in, just take a look down at the view through the house. From here, you can see all the way through the house and all the way through the gardens up to the uppermost fountain, which is almost 2 miles away. And this view is called the telescope, or the cannocchiale in Italian.
We'll start our visit by going up the grand staircase. And this wide, long staircase is the way that visitors would have entered the palace. And it was designed this way to be impressive, to awe the visitor, to actually put them in a sense of inferiority to the power of the Napoleon monarchy. Something very interesting is at the top of this first landing, in the ceiling, there's what looks to be a fresco. But if you look closely at it, around it, there's actually a false ceiling. And around it near the top, there's a little ledge. And on that, musicians would sit and play music as the visitors came in. And it seemed like it was coming from nowhere. It was quite a novelty at the time in the 1700s.
Perhaps it sounded like it was coming from the heavens. Now we'll pass through a series of rooms leading to the most important area, which were the king's rooms. The rooms were used as waiting rooms and meeting rooms for dignitaries and other important people who were waiting to have an audience with the king. And this series of rooms goes for like 700 feet before you arrive ultimately at the throne room.
I have to say, when being in palaces like this, I find the arrangement of rooms to be pretty strange. They're connected one to another directly, and there's no corridors along the side. So to go from one end of the palace to another, you had to go through another room where possibly there were other people. I can't imagine why they did this other than to try to allow light in to illuminate the room from both sides.
Do you think that people had to traipse through your bedroom to get to another room?
That's what I'm wondering.
That would be kind of weird.
Very puzzling.
As expected in a palace like this, all of the rooms were decorated lavishly. They had lots of gilt, lots of frescoes, lots of paintings, lots of decorative arts.
Tapestries,
the whole 9 yards. But a lot of the palace had to be restored and repaired and sort of brought back to where we see it today, because it was nearly abandoned in the 19th century. And in fact, after World War II, it had suffered a lot of damage, both from bombing and also from being used as a headquarters and a hospital for the army.
Now we're here in the throne room. It was interestingly one of the last rooms completed in the palace, and I find the proportions very interesting. It's a huge room with the throne at one end, and that left a dilemma for this king, or probably for any other. You could make the throne large to fit with the size of the room, but then the king would look very small sitting on the throne with his legs dangling and not reaching the ground. Or you could make the throne small to fit the king, but then the throne looks out of proportion with the size of the room. Now, the King Fernando, who was here at the time, was a tall man for his era, 6 feet tall, so they tried to have a compromise between those two things, but to me still he looks very small, or would look very small in a room like this. Now we're on our way to the king's bedroom, but before we get there we'll go through another bedroom that was used by Murat, who was a general of Napoleon's, who Napoleon put on the throne of Naples after he conquered Italy in 1803, and Murat stayed until 1814 when Napoleon was toppled throughout Europe. The king's bedroom is huge, a big open space and then a very large bed that is covered by a baldacchino that's very commonly seen on beds of this era. And it seems like it was done for privacy, but it was actually done for warmth, because these palaces were cold in the wintertime in particular. So at night you could get into your bed and get very cozy once the draperies were drawn around you.
Another really interesting room in the palace is the Queen's bathroom. Now, for whatever reason, we can't seem to find most of our pictures of the Queen's bathroom. But it was kind of cool because, first of all, it had the very first bidet.
First bidet in Italy.
Or first bidet in Italy, a common element of bathrooms in Italy even today. It's a little bench with a hole in it, and that was the Queen's toilet. Maybe most interesting was on opposite sides of the room, there were two sinks. There was a sink over here where there was hot water, and there was a sink on the opposite side of the room where there was cold water. Now, it's sort of unclear to me why that would be that way, because how on earth did you actually get warm water? And where did you mix it? And how did that work? I guess they had a lot of servants that would get buckets and carry it over to the bathtub, the gilded bathtub that the Queen had, and pour it in. But I don't know. I don't know why they didn't have them both together.
Founded by Queen Carolina, the Palatine Library extends over 3 rooms, 2 consultation rooms before you get into the main library. Interestingly, this library was really the domain of the queens in the palace, who did the decorations in here and were responsible for most of the books in what was considered a quite impressive collection back in the 1700s.
I didn't even know they let queens and women read in those days, but I guess they did. The Italians seem to have a love affair with nativity scenes, also called presepes in Italian. Usually they're brought out, of course, at Christmas time. But in fact, in Naples, there's an entire street devoted to the sale of items to make presepe. You can buy the whole thing, you can buy just the setting, you can buy the individual animals and the individual figures. It's quite impressive. But in this palace, they also had quite the collection of nativity scenes. They had everything from the original Jesus, Mary, and Joseph part of the nativity scene, and it kind of expanded beyond that. You'd see tradespeople, blacksmiths working on ironwork, you'd see shepherds, you'd see people having lunch at a table. I mean, just all sorts of things. Really very charming and very interesting.
The last thing we'll visit inside the palace is the Royal Theater. It's quite elaborately decorated. It was modeled after the opera house in Naples, the San Carlo, which along with the La Scala in Milan are the 2 leading opera houses in Italy. And it was a place for entertainment and relaxation for the court and the king.
After the darkness of the theater, let's take a little peek outside toward the gardens, which is where we'll visit next. And frankly, this was kind of my favorite part.
But first, if you're new here, she's Ann and I'm Ed, and our channel is Our Big Italian Adventure. And our goal is to show you the unvarnished Italy through our eyes. We have a small house in central Italy that we use as a base for exploring the peninsula. And we want to give you ideas on places to go and tips on how to have the best trip to Italy.
The Royal Garden is arranged along a long axis that's almost 2 miles long. And after an initial grassy lawn area, there are a series of pools and ponds and fountains that lead you all the way up to the very last fountain at the top of the hill.
You're going to want to go all the way to the top. If you don't feel like walking, there is outside the palace a shuttle bus stop. And for €3, you can ride to the top, or you can or ride back down, or do both for the $3 fee. And what I would recommend is that you walk up so all of the statues and pools are in front of you. And then decide if you're feeling tired, you can take the bus back. You find the stop for the bus coming back to the left of the final fountain.
The fountains represent scenes from Greek and Roman mythology. Interestingly, it was about this time in the 1700s that both Pompeii and Herculaneum or Herculano were rediscovered, and the king was very interested in all of the discoveries there and antiquities in general, and so used those themes throughout the fountains and the ponds and the statuary that graces the whole way up the hill.
The first fountain we get to is called the Fountain of the Dolphins, and the dolphins were really the messengers of Neptune, the god of the sea. I find this set of dolphins a little bit frightening. It's certainly not like the cuddly types of dolphins that we generally picture.
Certainly not like Flipper, which was a show during my childhood.
It has a grotto hidden underneath this fountain, which could be a private place for a meeting or just relaxation for the king or one of the other courtiers.
Next up the slope is Aeolus, keeper of the winds. And normally winds were depicted as horses back in Greek and Roman times. And of course the pools between the fountains are home to many fish, some of whom are quite large.
Next we reach the statue of Ceres, who was the goddess of fertility and motherhood.
And agriculture.
Next we get to the statue of Venus and Adonis, two beautiful gods who had this wonderful love story that interestingly has as a backdrop a little bit of godly incest that was part of the birth of Adonis.
When we finally get to the very top fountain, we see a statue of Diana and Actaeon. And Actaeon was a young hunter who was out with his dogs hunting for deer when he stumbled upon the pool where Diana was bathing. And in her modesty, she was really upset. And so in retribution, she turned Actaeon into a deer. And then his dogs fell upon him and ripped him apart because they didn't recognize their master.
Bit of a gory story
for this
fountain
story,
at the very top. The waterfall that feeds this whole series of fountains and pools comes from a source 25 miles away. It's fed over a large aqueduct, the Carolingian Aqueduct, that was completed in 16 years, very soon after the palace was started, because they wanted to get these gardens in use and on display as quickly as possible. Before returning to the palace, we want to visit the English garden off to the right side of this last fountain. The architect designed this to look like an ancient Roman town, maybe something like Pompeii. So in it you can see some little temples, actually one building with a ruined roof that has frescoes on the side. There's a beautiful statue of Venus taking a bath along the side of a pool. It's all in all a beautiful and relaxing area.
Now it's time to return down the slope, either by foot or by shuttle bus. While you're at it, take in the whole view over the palace towards the Bay of Naples, which is quite breathtaking. I'm sure you can guess that we think a visit to the Reggia di Caserta is a worthwhile way to spend your day. It's a short distance from Naples, easy to get to, and just a magnificent palace to visit and magnificent gardens. So we highly recommend it.
After visiting a palace like this, I'm left with two questions. First, did people like living in houses like this? I mean, they're so over the top and they can feel really impersonal and cold and not homey at all. And second, did they have any qualms about spending all the money it takes to build a house like this when there were so many other things the money could be used for? My guess to the answers to this are they didn't really like living here very much, but they had no qualms about spending the money on it. They felt that they really deserved it, and it was the way for them to show how powerful they were.
In our next video, we'll visit another of Naples' world-class attractions. If you'd like to be notified about that video, please consider subscribing. And if you can't wait for that video, here are a couple others that you might consider watching. Ciao for now.
A presto. I really liked visiting that place. I thought it was good.
I did too. I hope other people will consider visiting it.
I hope that the video sort of shows that to people.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, good.